Welcome to the Church of St Nicholas, Barfreston. Barfreston is deep in the Kent countryside, approximately halfway between Canterbury and Dover. The Church of St Nicholas is important, not only to those of us who already know and love it, but to 12th century church architecture and carving in Kent, in England, in Europe. This small Norman church stands on a plateau, constructed on a southeast-facing slope in the tiny, unspoiled village of Barfreston. The lower walls are of flint and the upper of Caen ashlar. Nave and chancel together are less than 50 feet in length. The floor plan could be described as two abutting rectangles. But how these two boxes have been adorned! The quality and profusion of the decoration is breathtaking. The outstanding feature is the south doorway, where major and minor shafts support a tympanum of unsurpassed beauty and breadth of aspiration. The church also possesses a rare wheel window in the east end, and there are two other Norman doorways of note, the first in the north wall, the second in the south wall. The interior is small and exquisite. Barfreston is simply magnificent. An oxymoron? Come and see. First, a little history, because little is known. F. H. Worsfold associates Barfreston with the Deport family. Hugo Deport was a sub-constable of Dover Castle in 1079 and was granted the manor of Barfreston. His great-grandson, Adam Deport, married the wealthy Mabile d'Orval from Normandy in 1180. These frescoes adorned the walls of Barfreston before the 19th century restoration. They may represent the founders. Was the church a thanksgiving for their marriage? The original decoration was certainly joyous. Unfortunately, only traces of the frescoes are visible today. Stylistically, the carving is late 12th century. The architect R.C. Hussey, who oversaw the restoration in 1840, found that the material had been used before. He believed that some stones had been misplaced during the reassembly at Barfreston. One possible misplacement that is easily comprehended concerns the top three stones of the wheel window. Here the pattern on both sides is broken. Could there be a more logical arrangement? Hussey contended that the source of Barfreston's amazing masonry had been the chapel of Baldwin, Archbishop of Canterbury. This chapel at Hackington was demolished after the Archbishop's death in 1190, possibly to prevent it rivaling Christ Church, Canterbury, as a magnet for pilgrims. Barfreston, the beneficiary of its destruction, became in its turn a site on the pilgrim route between Dover and Canterbury. By the early 19th century, the church was falling into ruin, having been damaged in a landslip. In Hussey, it found a supremely conscientious and careful restorer. An account of his work is published in Archaeologia Cantiana, 1886. We owe much to the Victorians. Let us look at the exterior of the church. The south doorway shows carvings of the highest order, most probably the work of the Guild of Masons, based in Canterbury. Major and minor shafts are formed into capitals to support an exquisite tympanum. The main subject, Majestas Domini, or Christ in Glory, is surrounded by 3 voussoirs. The innermost voussoir is a narrow band of foliage. The middle voussoir has a fantastical representation of animals, inspired by medieval bestiaries. The outermost depicts more typical scenes of medieval life, possibly the craftsmen of the manor. In the vesica, Christ raises one hand in blessing, while the other holds an open book. He is surrounded above by angels, 2 holding scrolls. At one remove are coroneted heads of noble mortals, while at his feet are a sphinx, 2 mermaids, and a griffin. For a closer look at the outer voussoir, we move clockwise round the circumference. Man-at-Arms. Lady of the Manor. Minstrel with viol. Cellarer with casque and flagon. Armourer burnishing a shield. Steward with parchment roll. Labourer digging. Forester with bow. Woodreeve working on timber. Miller with a sack of flour. Elijah being fed by a raven. John the Baptist. David rending the lion's jaws. A second man-at-arms. Now the vignettes from the middle voussoir. Hare, wanton and ape. Bear with a harp. Beasts drinking mead. A fabulator, forerunner of an actor. A partridge being toasted by a hare. 2 figures collar wrestling. 2 men, possibly with a firestone. A horse and rider. A falconer with hawk and hound. Hounds coursing. Churchman on a small palfrey. Monkey with a dead hare on a goat. The central archbishop seems quite misplaced in this milieu. The tympanum is supported on equally remarkable dual capitals. The inner capital, on the east of the doorway, has 2 jousting knights, symbolizing justice through trial by combat. The outer capital shows the Lion of Judah, representing Christ, fighting a winged dragon, the devil. Other malevolent forces seem less obvious to us today. For example, the hedgehog on the far east of the abacus. But in the Middle Ages, the hedgehog was considered as full of vices as spines. More obvious harbingers of ill are the omnipresent dragons, griffins and manticores. A manticore is a creature with a human head, but the body of a beast. My own favourites are above the jousting knights. On the western side of the door, the outer capital shows a hippocentaur, representing the dual nature of Christ. He is taking on the devil in the form of a ubiquitous dragon. The inner capital shows two stylized leaves, representing the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. No, I don't know which is which. Some of the abacus to the west has been destroyed, presumably to accommodate the timber supports of the porch, which enclosed the doorway until 1810. The disappearance of the porch has undoubtedly accelerated the deterioration of the carvings. From the south doorway, we move to the east wall. In the east wall is a fine wheel window. Norman wheel windows are more rare than those of rose design. The rich frieze is a medley of winged beasts and foliage which merge into and out of one another in luxurious abandon. The spokes are colonnettes, that is, they are round. During the 1840 restoration, one colonnette was found to be wooden and suffering with the ills of ancient wood. It had to be replaced. Perhaps the wooden one was itself a replacement for an original broken during the 12th century demolition at Hackington. The corbel table of grotesque heads extends all round the church and has great variety and inventiveness. Some believe that the corbels represent evil spirits. Some people refer to our grotesques as gargoyles, but while a grotesque and a gargoyle may be similar in appearance, that is, a human or animal head, natural or fantastical, and often frightening, a gargoyle should form part of a roof gutter or drainage system. It always has an open mouth and usually a long neck, so that it can protect the building by spouting rainwater clear of the stonework and foundations. Indeed, the word gargoyle is derived from the French gargouille, meaning throat. Later, an elongated body frequently replaced the long neck. Gargoyles and grotesques were originally introduced to England after the Norman conquest, when they were first used in castles to intimidate the indigenous inhabitants. Gradually, they became more closely associated with churches and cathedrals. Although they are most closely linked with Gothic architecture of the Middle Ages, the tradition of grotesques dates back to ancient Egypt, Greece, and pagan Rome. Indeed, Christianity may originally have used pagan images on the exterior of churches to attract people of the old religions by providing a bridge between the familiar and the new. Once grotesques had been established as conventional decorative features of church architecture, later centuries adhered to the tradition as late as the 19th century, and many of the grotesques we now have date from then rather than the Middle Ages. There is no shame in this. The grotesques of Notre Dame, probably the most famous in the world, are 19th century sculptures. So let us simply rejoice in the craftsmanship and originality of our stonemasons. Using the language of the bestiary, some animals, like the fox and the ape, represent the devil himself. They are balanced by the church's guardian lions, who are here because in legend lions could sleep with their eyes open and consequently symbolized vigilance. Other carvings on the east wall include a dragon in a circular surround. and a mutilated St. Martin of Tours, sharing his cloak with a beggar. This is another link with Dover. St. Martin has featured on Dover's coat of arms for at least 7 centuries. The eagle of St. John is the only survivor of the 4 evangelist symbols, shown in an engraving from 1773. These surrounded a mutilated figure, probably Christ. It is likely that this figure is now north of the wheel window, with a griffin to its left and a crouching dragon to the right. The final carving of interest in the east wall is on an archstone of the mural arcade framing the east windows of the chancel. Here a lizard points towards the feet of a prone man. According to the bestiaries, an old blind lizard finds an east-facing wall so that it can face the rising sun, which will restore its sight. The smiling face on the shaft opposite may represent the sun. There is a parallel between the lizard and the recumbent figure, who is waiting for the Sun of Righteousness or Dayspring to arise and remove spiritual blindness. From the east end, we move to the block doorway in the north wall. Note the hood triple chevron moulding above the band of foliage and the ornate capitals. The left capital shows a dragon, happily eating its tail. The right has 2 dancing girls, possibly holding the head of John the Baptist. Their accompanying demons may explain why the north door was sometimes called the Devil's Door. In the south wall of the chancel, an arched recess holds a mutilated carving. C. Kaiser identifies this as St. Michael killing the dragon. The coil of the dragon is clear, and the outline of his sword blade is just visible. There is a third doorway in the south wall. This is the priest's doorway and is also blocked. The hood has characteristic chevron moulding, while the damaged tympanum shows a mutilated crowned head. There is an unusual capital. Before we go into the church, note the mass markers on the jambs of the south doorway. With a stick inserted to catch a shadow, these were used as a sundial to indicate the hour of the daily mass. After the invention of clocks at the end of the 13th century, their use declined. On the west jamb of the door is a carving of a scallop shell. Today the scallop shell symbol is most closely associated with the pilgrim path to Compostela. But in the Middle Ages there were 4 greater pilgrimages: Compostela, Shrine of St. James, Canterbury, Shrine of St. Thomas a Becket, destroyed in 1538 during the dissolution of the monasteries. We tend to forget its European-wide importance before that. Cologne and the Shrine of the Three Kings or Magi, whose bones finally reached there from Constantinople via Milan. Rome and the tombs of the Apostles. Rome's popularity waned during the rival papacy in Avignon and the dispute with France. All the pilgrim paths intersected and overlapped, and during the Middle Ages the scallop shell was simply a symbol the pilgrim carried to show his calling. This is shown in the poem by Sir Walter Raleigh, where he begs, "Give me my scallop shell of quiet." This poem was supposedly written in the Tower in 1603, after Raleigh had been sentenced to death, but before the stay of execution had arrived. Why was the scallop shell chosen as the pilgrim symbol? Scallop shells are free, easy to obtain, especially near a coast, and light to carry. Iconically, it was regarded as appropriate because all the contours on the shell lead to a single point, as all the pilgrim paths had a single goal. But perhaps most importantly, if a pilgrim in need held out his shell, then by tradition he might be allowed as much sustenance as he could scoop into it, food such as oats, or perhaps even a drink of ale. Before we enter the church, pause once more to admire the superb door with its elegant and finely wrought iron hinges. Medieval blacksmiths could also be fine craftsmen. Now let us go inside. Today, churches often use soft furnishings and flowers to add colour. The medieval church needed no such help. It was a positive riot of colour. The Society of Antiquaries of London hold Herbert L. Smith's watercolours, painted just prior to the Restoration. From these we can gain an inkling of what was lost. We work clockwise round the chancel. The reproduction of the frescoes in the east wall of the chancel provide a graphic illustration of the dangers St. Nicholas faced due to landslips at the southeast corner before the Hussey Restoration. The painting on the north side of the northmost window recess seems damage-free. That on the south side shows cracking. The middle arch shows a very nasty crack through the centre, while the reproductions in the southmost recess show great voids that presage doom unless immediate action is taken. Today's church is more austere. Now one of the few remaining traces of the murals is in the northmost recess of the east wall. Compare now with then. The church is small and perfectly proportioned. The awe-inspiring chancel arch is carved on both sides. The chevrons of the hood find echoes in the zigzags of the supporting shafts. But should these shafts have been assembled as twists like barley sugar rather than zigzags? The string courses still contain some original carvings. In the Middle Ages, an aspiring stonemason began as an apprentice to a qualified man. Every apprentice, once trained, was examined at a mason's lodge. If he passed the examination, he was admitted to that lodge and given his mason's mark. This was unique to him and was put on each piece of work so that it could be identified as his. The mason now belonged to a guild, and these guilds were the origin of Freemasonry. perhaps because the stone used by masons was called freestone, a soft stone, so that it could be worked with chisels and easily carved into intricate designs. From the nave we can examine the stained glass. The glass is mostly Victorian, but good nevertheless. The wheel window is early Victorian, although early English in style. It is the work of W. Miller. The window showing the church's patron saint, Nicholas, was designed by Sir Martin Travers in 1928. The most endearing touch is the church cradled in the saint's left arm. But note the other characteristic symbols, the children and the pawnbroker's motif of 3 golden balls. There are 3 windows above the altar, dedicated to Jane Austen. This Jane was born Jane Newnham Collingwood Clavell. She was the wife of Edward Thomas Austen, rector of Barfreston from 1854 until his death in 1908. He was the son of Admiral Sir Francis William Austen, brother of the Jane Austen, novelist. Of the remaining windows in the chancel, the most unexpected is the Red Hand of Ulster. The delightful quadrifoil window, high in the west wall, is reminiscent of the grisaille style. Finally, we come to the bell. The engraving of 1773 shows that Barfreston once had a small bell turret on the northeast corner. This has been lost. The bell is still 14th century in style, but its bell tower now is an ancient yew tree in the churchyard. Simply magnificent!